James had always been the skeptical type, dismissing tales of ghosts and supernatural happenings as the stuff of movies and overactive imaginations. So when he got a job working the night shift at Morton's storage warehouse, the old legends about it didn't faze him. Locals spoke of strange happenings, cold patches, and unexplained noises during the night, especially around the older sections of the facility. The first few weeks were uneventful. James performed his duties, occasionally enjoying the quiet and solitude that came with working alone in such a vast space. But things began to change one cold December night. As James made his rounds, he started to hear faint whispers. Thinking it was just the wind or perhaps the building settling, he continued on his way. But as he approached aisle 13, an old section rarely used anymore, the whispers grew louder. It wasn't the wind. The voices were distinct, albeit hushed, sounding like children's voices giggling and murmuring among themselves. Curiosity piqued, James decided to investigate. He ventured deeper into aisle 13, guided only by the narrow beam of his flashlight. The voices seemed to be coming from a set of old wooden crates, dusty and long forgotten. They were marked 1965. Slowly, he pried open the nearest crate. To his astonishment, inside were toys from the 60s: wooden soldiers, porcelain dolls with faded dresses, and old-fashioned wind-up cars. All were in pristine condition, as if they had just been made. But what was even more perplexing was that they seemed to be moving. The soldiers marched in place, the dolls' eyes followed James as he moved his flashlight, and the car's wheels twitched and turned. Unnerved, James considered leaving, but his desire for answers anchored him to the spot. He opened another box, and inside, he found a diary. The leather-bound book belonged to someone named Evelyn. Flipping through the pages, he learned that Evelyn had once been an employee at Morton's in the 60s. The diary described her deep love for the toys she was responsible for, how she believed they had souls, and she often spoke to them during her shifts. The last entry, dated December the 24th, 1965, read, "The toys are unhappy here, confined to their crates, longing for the outside world. Tonight, I will perform a ritual to give them life, to free them from their wooden and porcelain prisons." As James read, the atmosphere in the warehouse grew colder. The toys began to move more violently. The dolls' eyes blinked, the cars started to roll forward, and the wooden soldiers formed ranks. The whispers grew louder and more frantic, echoing Evelyn's name. In the distance, a shadowy figure appeared, a woman, with an old-fashioned uniform, her face obscured by darkness. "Evelyn," James whispered, piecing together the puzzle. She had never left the warehouse. She was the toy keeper, and she had made sure her beloved toys were never lonely. A cold wind blew through the warehouse, extinguishing the lights and plunging the aisle into darkness. James felt a presence beside him. The toys had surrounded him, their movements no longer playful but sinister. He could feel the doll's porcelain fingers clutching at him, the wooden soldiers poking and prodding with their tiny rifles. Panicking, he fumbled for his radio and screamed for help. Static crackled in response, and then, a childlike voice whispered, "Play with us, James." Just as quickly as it started, the onslaught ceased. The lights flickered back on, and the toys returned to their inanimate states. Evelyn's shadow had vanished. James never returned to Morton's storage warehouse after that night. The management, having heard the stories before, simply sealed off aisle 13, deeming it a storage space for unwanted inventory. The whispers, however, never stopped. Late at night, if you put your ear to the walls of the old warehouse, you can still hear the echoes of the past, a toy keeper and her restless charges, forever longing for the world outside their wooden crates. St. Margaret's Hospital stood tall amidst the modern city buildings. It was an ancient relic, boasting both Victorian architecture and modern facilities. Most of its history was a matter of pride, but some chapters, as Nurse Lila would soon discover, were better left closed. Lila was a recent addition to the St. Margaret's family. She was young, enthusiastic, and had a penchant for listening to the old-timers' tales, stories about the pioneering days of medicine, legendary doctors, and the occasional ghost story. But one narrative, fragmented and whispered among only a few, caught her attention the most. The legend of Room 313. Patients spoke of it in hushed tones. "You hear cries from there," murmured Mr. Thompson, a long-term resident of the orthopedic wing. "They say it's where the hospital's mistakes are locked away." Lila's curiosity was insatiable. She asked her colleagues, but they dismissed it as baseless rumors, emphasizing that Room 313 was just an old storage space. Yet, she noticed, no one ever entered or left that room. And the digital room board always marked it as occupied. Late one evening, when the night had settled and a storm brewed outside, Lila's curiosity piqued. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, she decided to visit Room 313. The dimly lit corridors of the old wing felt suffocating, the flickering bulbs not helping her already nervous heart. The closer she got to Room 313, the more the atmosphere grew cold and tense. Standing before the old wooden door, she took a deep breath. The nameplate read storage. With trembling hands, she turned the handle. The room was pitch dark, but she could faintly make out the shapes of numerous beds. Lila reached for her pocket torch. As the narrow beam pierced the darkness, what it revealed made her blood turn cold. The room was filled, not with storage boxes, but with beds containing figures. Patients, or what appeared to be patients, lay still. Some were covered in bandages, others had strange tubes and old medical equipment attached to them. But the most horrifying part was their eyes. They all stared blankly at the ceiling, pale and lifeless. Yet, as Lila's light moved across the room, she felt as if every eye was following her. An old gramophone sat in one corner, playing a low, haunting melody that seemed to be a dirge. Near it was a desk with scattered medical records. Compelled to find an explanation, Lila picked up one of the files. It was a record from 1953. The patient, a young woman named Clara, had come in for a routine surgery, but never left Room 313. The details were vague, but mentioned a medical anomaly discovered during the procedure. Another file from 1971 mentioned a man who had been in a coma, with a note scribbled. Patient reacted violently to an experimental drug. Shifted to Room 313 for special care. One after another, the files told stories of the hospital's failed experiments, unforeseen complications, and unapproved treatments. Room 313 was where the evidence of these medical misadventures was concealed, a place where the hospital's tarnished reputation remained untouched. Suddenly, the gramophone's dirge grew louder, its tone more ominous. The room grew colder. Lila felt a presence behind her. Turning slowly, she came face to face with a figure draped in an old nurse's uniform, its face obscured in shadow except for two piercing, accusatory eyes. "You shouldn't be here," the apparition whispered, her voice echoing through the room. Lila, paralyzed with fear, could only watch as the shadowy nurse moved toward one of the beds, caressing the head of the motionless patient there. "They're my responsibility now," she murmured. "The hospital's forgotten souls." Lila's fear reached a breaking point. Mustering every ounce of courage, she bolted, leaving behind the room and its tormented inhabitants. The eerie dirge of the gramophone chased her down the corridor. The next day, Lila submitted her resignation. She couldn't bear the weight of St. Margaret's dark secrets. Room 313 remained a forbidden zone, its occupants a testament to the transgressions of the past. Word about Lila's experience spread, but it was dismissed by many as the product of an overactive imagination. Still, late at night, when the corridors of St. Margaret's lay silent, one could hear the faint strains of an old gramophone, playing a mournful tune that echoed the pain and suffering of souls trapped in time. The Sterling office complex was an imposing building. By day, its many rooms buzzed with activity, phone calls, meetings, and the hum of fluorescent lights. But by night, it was a cavernous monolith, with its long corridors and empty offices casting eerie shadows. Daniel had worked as a night security guard at Sterling for 3 years. The job was mostly uneventful, involving routine patrols and monitoring the building's CCTV system. But that monotony was what Daniel preferred. After a turbulent past, he was glad for the quiet, solitary nights. One fateful evening, as rain pelted against the building and the wind howled, Daniel settled into his chair for another night's watch. He sipped his coffee, the steam dancing up into the dimly lit room, and began his usual scan of the camera feeds. Camera 1. Parking lot empty. Camera 2. Main lobby still. Camera 3. Hallway deserted. Camera 4. Conference room wait. Daniel squinted. In the corner of the conference room stood a figure, completely still. It looked like a man but was oddly distorted, with elongated limbs and a hazy face. He couldn't make out any features, just two piercing white eyes staring at the camera. Confused, Daniel radioed his colleague, Rick, on the floor above. "Hey, is someone messing around in the conference room?" Rick's voice crackled back, "Conference room? Nah, mate. It's been locked up since evening. Want me to check?" Daniel nodded, then remembered Rick couldn't see him. "Yeah, please. There's something weird on the camera." As Rick went to investigate, Daniel kept his eyes on the figure, who remained motionless. Minutes passed, feeling like hours. Finally, Rick's voice returned, tension evident. "The room's empty, Dan. And the door was locked when I got there." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. He looked back at the screen. To his horror, the figure was now closer to the camera, its white eyes staring intently, almost accusingly. Panicking, Daniel switched to other cameras. Every feed now had the figure, always closer to the lens, always with those unblinking eyes. It was as if the entity was omnipresent, observing him from all angles. Daniel stood, chair screeching behind him. He needed to get out. But just as he was about to make for the exit, the security room's door slammed shut. Daniel lunged at it, but it wouldn't budge. He was trapped. Behind him, the bank of monitors showed a figure approaching each camera until it was mere inches away. Then, one by one, the screens started to go black. The last screen that remained lit was the camera outside the security room. The figure stood there, its eyes now more intense, almost glowing. Then, a whisper, so soft it was almost drowned out by the raging storm outside. "Watched, always watched." Terror gripped Daniel. He backed away, knocking over the table with the monitors. The lights began to flicker. The whisper grew louder, more voices joining in, echoing the same haunting words. Memories of his past flooded back, mistakes he had made, people he had hurt. Was this retribution? Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness. Daniel felt a presence inches from his face, those glowing eyes piercing through the black. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The lights returned. The door was ajar. The monitors were back to their routine feeds, with no sign of the mysterious figure. Rick, alarmed by the noise, rushed in. "Dan, what happened?" Shaken, Daniel could barely find his words. "It had watched me, Rick. It knows." Rick, trying to calm him down, suggested it might have been a glitch or a prank. But Daniel knew what he had seen and felt. He handed in his resignation that very night. Rumors spread throughout the Sterling office complex about that cursed night. Some said the building was built on haunted grounds. Others believed the entity was a manifestation of collective guilt, always watching, always judging. The position for a night security guard remained vacant for a long time. But eventually, the tale faded, becoming yet another urban legend. Yet, unknown to all, in a hidden corner of the security room, behind a stack of old monitors, lay one that was never turned off. And if one were to look closely, they'd see two white eyes, forever watching, forever waiting. As the clock ticks towards dawn, this is Midnight Callers signing off, reminding you, When darkness falls, the stories rise. Sleep tight if you dare.